I want to do a series with you on the commandments. Last Sabbath, I had a study in regard to the value of the commandments. And I think it's helpful now and then to take a good look at the commandments, because I would guess that not one person here is a full commandment keeper. Now, whenever I give this study, I really like to make a couple of things plain in the beginning. Number one, as soon as we talk about the commandments, some people are thinking legalism. I have no interest to promote legalism. It's a lesson in futility to try to earn salvation by our own efforts. However, there is another way to be a commandment keeper. And there's two aspects of it. Number one is that we have to accept the commandment keeping of Jesus. He kept them perfectly while he was here on earth and offers to give us that perfect record. We get it at conversion when we allow him to take over our life. That's when we get it, and as long as we stay converted, we don't believe once saved, always saved, unless we add a little bit. I do believe in once saved, always saved, as long as you stay saved. So, as long as we keep that relationship with him, then we have a perfect record. But not only that, he seeks to live out his life through us. So instead of the commandments being a list of don'ts, don't do this, don't do that, make sure you don't do that, it is a list of promises. Whenever we see something that we don't have in our life, all we have to do is go to him in prayer and ask him to put it in there. And there is a part, he doesn't just do it for us. We do have to cooperate with him. But he will begin to do his part to put it in us. And the more we allow him to put in us and cooperate, then we become a better and better commandment keeper. I find that there is a danger, same danger that the Jews faced. You remember when the rich young ruler came to Jesus, he thought he was a commandment keeper. But he didn't study the lessons that I'm going to give you. If he had, he would not have considered that he was a commandment keeper. But if we have a shallow knowledge of the Ten Commandments, it's easy to think that we are keeping them. And therefore, we have a danger to slip into legalism because we feel that we're doing it. But when we look at them carefully and we see that we're not doing it, all of it, it helps us to really desire a better walk with Christ and to receive more from him, and also to praise him more for the perfect record that we do have through Christ. So we're going to look at the first and second commandments today. Now, another mistake that I think is often made is that the first verse in Exodus 20 is left off. When you see a plaque with the Ten Commandments, most of them leave off the first verse. And that's a fatal mistake because it tends to make the commandments a list of don'ts. But the first verse turns it into a promise. He says, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. If you look carefully at that, what he's saying is, you have witnessed many miracles. The king didn't want to let you out, and most of you didn't even want to go out, but I performed all the miracles necessary not only to get you out of Egypt, but to get you here at Mount Sinai. So, the commandments simply are another list of miracles that God wants to do for his people. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. He's saying here that if you will let me be your God, I will be such a wonderful God to you that you won't want any other gods before me. I'll be first in your interests and desires. Now let's put the magnifying glass on this. What is this really talking about? Patriarchs and Prophets 3:05. Jehovah, the eternal, self-existent, uncreated one, himself the source and sustainer of all, is alone entitled to supreme reverence and worship. So there are two aspects here. When we don't have any other God before him, we will have supreme reverence for God. Whether we're in the sanctuary, where he meets with us, or during worship at home, where he meets with us, but we will have a supreme reverence for him. Those that can laugh and talk and do all kinds of things during the church service have not yet received this supreme reverence. Because when we do, we have a desire to receive everything from him while we are in his presence. And then worship, I'm afraid in the Adventist church generally, worship only includes 11 o'clock service. But this is not correct. Sabbath school is worship too. But all of what we do is worship. And prayer meeting is worship. Now I realize there are occasions and situations where we cannot attend. But in general, if a person has no other God before him, then when the church gets together to worship, they're going to be there in the midst of that group. Man is forbidden to give to any other object the first place in his affections or his service. There's an awful lot of people who call themselves Christian that their job comes ahead of God. How do we know that? Because here's one of the examples of this. They work so hard at their job that they can't get up Sabbath morning to come to the services, not realizing that they're putting their job in front of Jesus. And so this first commandment is helping us to understand the importance of making him first. Also, service. Now, not everybody can be a missionary. Not everyone can have full-time, doing the work that is a part of the church endeavor, whether it's on a self-supporting basis or a denominational. It doesn't matter. That is all work that is done for God. But many of us have to have a regular job. However, there is still service for God that everybody is to render, even though they are still working at a regular job. And if that service is not important to us, or we just don't get around to it because, there's lack of interest, we're breaking the first commandment. Because his service comes first. The job is really, for the true Christian, the job is simply to pay expenses, that's all, so that we can serve God. Our real job is serving God. I was really interested in a testimony last night at the Wildwood Vespers. A young man is working in the store, and that's his job, working at the store. But he saw a customer that needed to be talked to, and so he spent quite a bit of time with his customer, found out he was kind of new age, and then he decided to try to get him interested in the Great Controversy. God blessed him, he got interested, and he bought the book before he left the store. That's an example of making service first. Yes, we have to do enough work to, make a living, but that's not the real reason we're there. The real reason we're where we are is service for God. And when that's first, when we're keeping the first commandment, you can't stop us from doing that. That's what we're going to do. We're going to serve others. Whatever we cherish that tends to lessen our love for God or to interfere with the service due Him, of that do we make a God. So here we have some real probing suggestions. What is first in our affections? Is it a husband or wife, or is it God? Is it work, or is it God? Anything. We sometimes think we're free of idols because we don't bow down to stone and wooden images. We don't do that. But actually, there's more idolatry today than there was in the Old Testament times, because there are so many things that take the first affections of someone. Whatever is first place in our affections, and whatever is the first in the service we render. Now, on the other hand, if it lessens our love for God. Now, the list is endless, so I just mention a little. Suppose we're too busy to have worship. And so we just go on with our daily activities. Guess what? We are cherishing something that is going to lessen our love for God, because we need that connection on a daily basis to have the love for God that we ought to have. And if there's anything that interferes with the service that we are to render to Him, then we have a God. So it really would behoove us to think carefully through our lifestyle and what we're doing, and examine everything to see, do we have a God in our life? Or are we being fooled that we don't have one, and yet we do? If we don't have a perfect clean record on this, then guess what? If we are in Christ, we have a perfect record, and we can ask Him to put this commandment more fully into our life. In Lift Him Up, page 142, I saw that whatever divides the affections or takes away from the heart supreme love for God. We've talked about that one already, but here's another one. Or prevents unlimited confidence and entire trust in Him. So we get into a situation. What is our reaction? Are we perfectly trusting God? If we don't perfectly trust Him, we're breaking the commandment. We're saying that He can't help us. we're saying that he's not aware of our need. But it's not true. He is aware of our need, and he knows how to help, and he wants to help. As I was looking at this again for today, I realized, there are times, many times, when at least at first, I don't have that unlimited trust in him. But he is leading us to the place where we will have that unlimited confidence and entire trust in him. And once we get there, we will be unaffected by whatever goes on around us, whether it's good or bad, whatever is going on, it will not affect us because we instantly remember to put our trust in him and that he's going to take care of things and work it out according to his will. Now, it doesn't mean he's going to always give us good things. No, he doesn't always do that. But he will work it out according to his will if our entire trust is in him. And if it's not, then we are not keeping this commandment. Back up. I saw that whatever divides the affections or takes away from the heart supreme love for God or prevents unlimited confidence and entire trust in him assumes the character and takes the form of an idol. There is allowed no separation of our affections from God. So if at any time during the day or the week or the month there is a separation between our affections from God, then we have an idol. Nothing is to divide our supreme love for him. Or, here's another one, our delight in him. Is there ever a time when to think about him, to read about him, to talk about him doesn't bring great delight, or we just don't feel like doing it because we're not in the mood to do it? Then, we've broken the commandment. Your will, wishes, plans, desires, and pleasures must all be in subjection. So if there's ever a time you want your own way, you don't like the way that God has for you, you want to go your own way, you have an idol. And so you can see already, just by looking at the first commandment, that we're not complete commandment keepers. That some of these things that we've looked at, we all do. And yet, are we going to stay at the level that we're at? Or are we going to believe that the God that could get them out of Egypt, the God that could get them all the way to Mount Sinai, is able to lift us to a higher level of commandment keeping? If we believe that, we will keep advancing in our commandment keeping. And all the while, he provides his perfect commandment keeping for us. Now we look at the second commandment. Exodus 20, verses 4 and 5. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God. I'm thankful at least that no one here has those images. Some people put them on their dashboard and they have them in different places where they feel that it helps them to worship God. But God said don't do that. And there's a very good reason why he said don't do it. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 306. The second commandment forbids the worship of the true God by images or similitudes. Many heathen nations claimed that their images were mere figures or symbols by which the deity was worshipped, but God has declared such worship to be sin. So God said, don't do it. If we're willing to do what he said, then we're not going to do it. Now, some people get concerned about pictures of Jesus when they think about this commandment. And I suppose it's true that a picture could be worshipped, but we don't usually do that. I haven't seen many people do that. Kneel down in front of the picture of Jesus and worship him. I haven't seen people do that, although I suppose it is done by some. So whatever we have that we think is going to aid us in worshiping God has been forbidden. And here it explains why. The attempt to represent the Eternal One by material objects would lower man's conception of God. So if me as a human or some other human makes an object that looks like Jesus or looks like what they think Jesus looked like, and that lowers their understanding. Now, I don't think this is talking about in his humanity, okay? Because the picture him in his humanity, not in his divinity. But it will lower people's idea of God. The mind turned away from the infinite perfection of Jehovah would be attracted to the creature rather than to the Creator. And as his conceptions of God were lowered, so would man become degraded. Now, while we worship Jesus, we don't worship him in his humanity. We worship him as God because he was God also, and the Father and the Holy Spirit. So, as the mind tries to picture their perfection and their beauty and their worthiness of worship, it's better than to have something you look at that tells you about them. And so God has warned us about that. But there's a lot more to this commandment. He mentions that he is a jealous God. Patriarchs and Prophets 3:06 says, the close and sacred relation of God to his people is represented under the figure of marriage. Idolatry being spiritual adultery. The displeasure of God against it is fitly called jealousy. So if we break the first commandment, we've already broken the second one. You see, because he has to be first. That's the way it is in marriage. That's why God set it up that way. The partner has to be first. No one else can hold that place. Otherwise, jealousy is appropriate. And Jesus says he married us, and therefore all of our affection must go to him. And if we fail to have all of our attention and he's not first, then we are creating jealousy because he agreed to be our partner. He agreed to marry us, and we are not being faithful to him. Also, this second commandment opens our eyes to some things. Notice Exodus 20 verses 5 and 6. Visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Here he's pointing out two pathways that we can walk. And to some extent, the first path is going to happen whether we choose it or not. But the second path will cure the problems from the first path. And that is that heredity passes on the weaknesses that we have. And if we're not careful, we blame our children for things that we caused by passing on evil traits of character to them. What is the answer? Well, the answer is to gain the victory over our weaknesses as young as possible, preferably before marriage. But even if we gain the victory over them before marriage, some of them will still get passed on to those that are our children and then our grandchildren and so on. So he is giving us a warning in this one. Be careful how you live. Does it matter? Some people get the attitude, well, I'm free to do whatever I please and it doesn't affect anybody else, and so I can eat what I shouldn't eat and I can do the things that I shouldn't do. It's only affecting me. That's a lie from the devil. Everything we do affects somebody else. Even if we don't have children, people see us doing it. We, in our own body, have the result of doing it. And so it passes on to other people. Nobody lives alone in this whole world. Nobody is in a position where others are not affected by it. But the good news at the second part of this is that God is a God of mercy, and along with mercy is forgiveness, and he is always interested in removing the weaknesses that we have. It's not only forgiveness. Mercy is not just about forgiveness. Mercy is about removing the difficulties that we have. And so he wants to remove those things. And when we develop good characteristics, they pass on for 1,000 generations. It is inevitable that children should suffer from the consequences of parental wrongdoing. So there's no way to get around it. They are going to suffer from the mistakes of the parents. But they are not punished for the parents' guilt. That's very important for us to realize, that what the parent does, the child does not receive punishment for that. However, but they are not punished for the parents' guilt except as they participate in their sins. But then there's the solemn truth. It is usually the case, however, that children walk in the steps of their parents. So, as the children watch what the parents do, as they are not corrected maybe by the parents, they have a tendency to develop in the same weaknesses of character that the parents had. That does pass on to the children. But the guilt, they're not guilty until they do it themselves. That's an important aspect in regard to understanding salvation. By inheritance and example, the sons become partakers of the father's sin. So when we see our children suffering and struggling with weaknesses, we need to have compassion, because they got them possibly from us. Now, as we've watched our children and so on, I think I can see the 4 generations. We can see some things that came from our parents to them. As far as we can see, we don't have those weaknesses, but we can see that our parents did. So there's 4 generations there where it talks about that this inheritance is passed on to the children. Then, if the example that they have seen it will also affect them and cause them to fall easier because of the example. But God has a solution, and he puts it right there in the second commandment, that he has mercy, which includes forgiveness and includes power to overcome, so that parents do less and less of that as their children come along. And of course, we keep on being an example for our children even years and years afterward as well. Then it names a few things: wrong tendencies, perverted appetites, and debased morals, as well as physical disease and degeneracy, are transmitted as a legacy from father to son to the third and fourth generation. So if we have a struggle with something, whatever it might be certain articles of food or whatever it is, we have a struggle, it's very likely that our children will have the same struggle with those things. And if we gain the victory, it helps our children to gain the victory. They see that there is hope, that their parents are able. And you know, the best is when the children are young, but if we don't do it when they're young and we gain the victory later on, it still has an impact on their life as they see that mom and dad have gained the victory over something that they used to do. This fearful truth should have a solemn power to restrain men from following a course of sin. Notice the unselfish view that we see here. It's so easy for us to look at just ourselves and just worry about ourselves. But in the commandment, the second commandment, God is lifting our view to look at humanity, and especially those that are close to us, our family. And he's saying what you do in the family will affect all of your family. And what we do in the church is going to affect the whole church. Everything will affect the whole church, because what we do is not private. And therefore, when we realize the huge impact of what we do, it helps us to really pray more and say, Lord, I got to have help, because I don't want to be dragging my family down. I don't want to be dragging the church family down. I want to be lifting them up instead of dragging them down. Now, none of this was intended to bring discouragement to anybody. To say, oh, I'm such a mess, I might as well give up. No, that is not the purpose of the commandments. The purpose is to show us what we need. Just like the doctor, you don't like a doctor that can't tell you what's wrong with you. It's, that's the purpose why you go there, for him to discover what it is that's wrong. Well, through the commandments, God has been explaining what's wrong with us, so that once we know it, we can start seeking him for it, and he is always willing to give it. In prohibiting the worship of false gods, the second commandment, by implication, enjoins the worship of the true God. So anyone that doesn't want to worship the true God is breaking the second commandment. And to those who are faithful in his service, mercy is promised, not merely to the third and fourth generation, as is the wrath threatened against those who hate him, but to thousands of generations. And I did a little calculation about that. Let's suppose that we consider 40 years a generation. In 6,000 years, there will only be 150 generations. So when he says thousands in the plural, he's talking about way beyond our life on this earth as it is now. He's looking way into the future. Even if we took, which is true today, 20 years as a generation, still there would only be 300 generations in 6,000 years. So he's making a huge promise here that if you will let me be your God and you will make me first, then I will change you so completely that you'll stop hurting your family and you'll stop hurting the church and you'll stop hurting humanity, and it will last for thousands of generations, the blessings that you will be able to give to all those that come in contact with you. Now, isn't that good news? It's not bad news. Depends on how you look at it, it's true, but that is good news. And it's worth making him first in our lives. So may God bless you as you seek the Lord to become a keeper of the first two commandments.